It is time once again for CU Immigration here on WRFU LP Urbana 104.5 FM. I will be your host for this evening. My name is Mr. Garza, and I am here to let you know that WRFU is an open forum for the Urbana-Champaign community. Yes, it is. Views expressed are those of the speakers, in this case myself, and are not intended to represent WRFU or UCIMC, or, as we like to say on this version of the show, UPTV. All tangled up in my cords. These views are our own. So, by our, in this instance, I mean myself. And or anyone whose views may leak through in any of the news items that I might read. And I don't necessarily agree with everything that people say in the things that I read, but I do share them with you because I think there's something there worth hearing, even if it isn't necessarily something I agree with 100%. Okay? Are we clear on that? I think my camera is crooked. I don't know. Anyway, if it is, I apologize. It looks crooked to me. Is that better? I don't know if that's any better or not. Anyway, sorry. I'm my own TV producer, radio engineer, and on-air talent, as they say. I am all things in this show. Sorry. Making noise. Anyway, the last show of the year. Yes, another one of those last of the year things. This is the last show of this year. Although probably the second half, actually even the first half. Okay, this is the last show recorded this year. It'll be the first and second show of next year for you UPTV viewers. Last show of the year for you radio listeners. And on YouTube, you don't care because it's just whenever you happen to tune in. So yeah, this is a complicated show because of this weird time thing. But yeah, we won't be on UPTV till Friday, I believe. It's Friday evenings. And that will be well into the new year. So, first show of the year. Last show of the year. Yeah. So anyway, immigration, that's the topic. The theme of the show, not necessarily the topic of this episode, but it is the theme of the show. And I thought I would once again return to a point that I've made before, but haven't necessarily described in as great a detail as maybe is necessary to understand it. But often you will hear the name of a certain president, a certain sort of orangey-colored president, on this show, and it'll seem a lot of the time like I'm just talking about him, like it's just him, and if he would just go away, then everything would be great. That's not true. A lot of things would be a lot better for a lot of people, but it wouldn't just fix everything because this guy, Trump, has, as part of his push to become the person that he is today, I guess, the president and leader of his party and all that stuff, took it upon himself to embody something to become the face for, I don't want to call it a movement, but just an attitude that has been around in this country for a long time. So the attitude has existed for years and years and years. And you've heard earlier presidents tap into it a little bit with the so-called Southern strategy. It's basically to rile up and inspire racists, basically. Racists and bigots. I don't know any nicer way of putting it. But anyway, whatever this group is, and it's more than that. I don't want to make it too simplified because this is really a complex thing. Not all of these people that are supporting him really support him all the way. A lot of them would prefer that he was much, much farther out, and I'm pointing left, but I should be pointing right, farther out in the right wing field of things, but they support him because he's as close as they can imagine ever getting to that. And there are people on the other side who are like, well, I really wish he wasn't quite so whatever he is, but, I support him anyway because of these things. But a lot of it, a huge part of it, revolves around racism. There's no other way of putting it. And now a lot of these people identify their belief system and their whole thing with him because he's such a personally self-aggrandizing individual that he's made it his thing. He's gone out and said, this is me, this is my message, this is my belief, this is my thing. And people just kind of like, oh yeah, and they sort of like changed from already believing this stuff to believing it, and having his name attached to it. And so they're attached to him now in this weird way. So, I cannot do shows about immigration very well. I mean, I could do them. I could talk about this little point here. I could focus in on the little points of things that are happening here and there. And the nuances of this legislation and this change here and, some of the effects of these things on people. I could focus down on specifics and then just sort of steer away from the elephant in the room. But the elephant is standing in the room, stinking the place up. This is a very stinky elephant. And there's no way around it. If you're going to discuss this subject of immigration, you have to talk about the people that are supporting the policies that are hurting immigrants right now. There have been policies in the past that hurt immigrants, and we talked about those in the past. There will be policies in the future that hurt them, probably. Hopefully not, but probably. And we'll talk about them in the future. But right now, the policies that are hurting people have become almost synonymous with this one person. And you can't really talk about the one without the other unless you just are intentionally ignoring what's going on in the world. And I don't want to do that. So my sort of towards the end of the year resolution of how to proceed into the near future anyway with this show was to sort of take on bigger issues than just, okay, this thing is going on here and that thing is going on there, but to talk about more general trends and bigger things. So the last episodes were about nationalism, and before that it was, something else. So I'm taking on, biting off bigger pieces, so to speak, and chewing them over more thoroughly, hopefully, than just sort of hoping that some of this stuff, comes across in what I'm talking about when I get into specifics. So obviously that won't necessarily be the case when I have guests. We'll just talk about whatever there is to talk about with that person. But in general, when I'm here doing this by myself, I think I'm going to kind of branch out a little bit and try and take on these bigger issues that affect immigrants and immigration, but aren't necessarily specifically about them or some event. So this is really about this sort of movement. I don't know if I want to call it a movement, but a sort of amorphous group that generally calls themselves Republicans or conservatives or evangelicals or something along those lines, one of those things. It's going to be tricky to talk about because religion is mixed into this. And the people are like picking sides based on a lot of different things. And so anyway, I'm just going to jump into it and we'll see what we get across. This first story is entitled "Nothing Less Than a Civil War. These white voters on the far right see doom without Trump." Ooh, that's scary. So, Great American Pizza and Subs on a highway about 100 miles southeast of Las Vegas was busier and Trumpier than usual. On any given day, it serves MAGA subs and Liberty Bell lasagna. The Second Amendment pizza comes loaded with pepperoni and sausage. The dining room is covered in regalia praising President Trump. But this October morning was Trumpstock, a small festival celebrating the president. Speakers included the local Republican Congressman, Paul Gosar, and lesser-known conservative personalities. There was a fringe 2020 Senate candidate in Arizona who ran a website that published sexually explicit photos of women without their consent, a pro-Trump rapper whose lyrics include a racist slur aimed at Barack Obama, and a North Carolina activist who once said of Muslims, quote, "I will kill every one of them before they get to me," end quote. All were welcome, except liberals. Quote, "They label us white nationalists or white supremacists," volunteered Guy Taiho Decker, who drove from California to attend the event. A right-wing protester, he has previously been arrested on charges of making terrorist threats. Quote, "There's no such thing as a white supremacist, just like there's no such thing as a unicorn," Mr. Decker said. "We're patriots." Okay, so this is the first word that you hear that how this group self-identifies. Patriots, this is what they think of themselves as. What they're loyal to, I'm not entirely sure, other than they like to throw out words like the Constitution. We're Constitution-believing blah, blah, blah. Anyway. As Mr. Trump's bid for re-election shifts into higher gear, his campaign hopes to recapture voters who drifted away from the party in 2018 and 2019. Independents who embraced moderate Democratic candidates, suburban women tired of Mr. Trump's personal conduct, and working-class voters who haven't benefited from his economic policies. But if any group remains singularly loyal to Mr. Trump, it is the small but impassioned number of white voters on the far right, often in rural communities like Golden Valley, who extol him as a cultural champion, reclaiming the country from undeserving outsiders. Here's where immigration starts to peek in there a little bit. These voters don't passively tolerate Mr. Trump's build a wall message or his ban on travel from predominantly Muslim countries. They're what motivates them. They see themselves in his fear-based identity politics, bolstered by conspiratorial rhetoric about caravans of immigrants and democratic coups. The president draws support from a broader political and ideological cross-section of Republicans than the Trumpstock crowd reflected, and he attracts some independents and Democrats as well. The festival itself was relatively small, drawing about 100 people, though significant enough to attract the likes of Mr. Gosar. But events like it, as well as speaking engagements featuring far-right supporters of the president, have become part of the political landscape during the Trump era. Islamophobic taunts can be heard at his rallies. Hate speech and conspiracy theories are staples of some far-right websites. If Trumpstock was modest in size, it stood out as a sign of extremist public support for a sitting president. I lost my place. Oh, no. That's really annoying. There's tools here. It's so hard. Sorry. Okay. I won't touch it. And these supporters have electoral muscle in key areas. Mr. Trump outperformed Mitt Romney, the 2012 Republican nominee, in rural parts of Arizona like Mojave County, where Golden Valley is located. Mr. Trump won 58,282 votes in the county, compared to 47,901 for Mr. Romney, though Mr. Romney carried the state by a much bigger vote margin. Arizona will be a key battleground state in 2020. Democrats already flipped a Senate seat in a Tucson-based congressional district from red to blue in 2018. For Mr. Trump, big turnout from the white voters in areas like Mojave County and in rural parts of other battlegrounds like Florida, Michigan, Minnesota, and Georgia could be a lifeline in a tight election. Quote, "We like to call this the Red Wall of Arizona," said Lawrence Schiff, a psychiatrist and Republican campaign official in Mojave County who organizes in support of Mr. Trump's campaign. "Winning the state starts here, with us." Grassroots gatherings play a critical role in the modern culture of political organizing, firing up ardent supporters and cementing new ones. Small circles of Trump-supporting conservatives often organized online and outside the traditional Republican Party apparatus, engaged in more decentralized and explicit versions of the chest-beating that happens at Mr. Trump's closely watched political rallies. In interviews, people in the crowd described a white America under threat as racial minorities, typified by Mr. Obama, the country's first black president, gain political power. They described Mr. Trump as an inspirational figure who is undoing Mr. Obama's legacy and beating back the perceived threat of Muslims and Latino immigrants whom they denounced in prejudiced terms. Quote, "I don't have a problem with Muslims," said Angus Smith, an Arizona resident who attended the festival, "but they can take the rag off their head out of respect for our country?" End quote. I don't even have to comment on that. At Mr. Trump's official rallies, including a recent one in Florida, the president has referred to Mr. Obama by stressing his middle name, Hussein, and said Democrats were trying to stop me because I'm fighting for you. The Trump stock speakers pushed even further, tying Mr. Obama's middle name to a false belief that he is a foreign-born Muslim. And Democrats were portrayed not as just political opponents, but avatars of doom for Mr. Trump's predominantly white voter base and for the country. Quote, "There's no difference between the Democratic Socialists and the National Socialists," said Even Sayet, a conservative writer who spoke at the event referencing Nazi Germany. "Democrats," he said, "are the heirs to Adolf Hitler." A lot of this stuff it's hard to even, okay, I'll wait. I'll continue and then I'll comment later. Speakers at Trump's talk said their cultural fears had been exacerbated by their state's own changing nature. Arizona is on the front lines of undocumented border crossings from Mexico, and racial minorities are expected to outnumber white people in the state in the next decade. Arizona Democrats made political gains in 2018, and the National Party is riding high after it won governor's races this year in Kentucky and Louisiana. But Republicans remain bullish. They argue that a slice of their electoral base will only vote when the president is on the ballot and point to regions like northern Arizona as places to find, as Mr. Trump wrote in a recent tweet, the angry majority. "We have the greatest base in the history of politics," he said at a recent rally in Florida. In Arizona, the most prominent pro-Trump anti-immigrant groups are AZ Patriots and Patriot Movement AZ, which have held tight to their themes of white nationalism that some Republicans have denounced. In September, after repeated clashes, some members of the groups agreed to a court order to stop harassing migrants and church volunteers who helped them. Earlier this year, the groups and their allies organized a patriotism over socialism event in Gilbert, Arizona, near Phoenix, that included speeches from Representative Andy Biggs, the area's congressman, and Kelly Ward, the state's Republican Party chair. They appeared alongside more fringe figures, Sharon Slater of Family Watch International, which has promoted figures associated with anti-LGBT conversion therapy, and Laura Loomer, the far-right activist and Arizona native who was banned by Twitter and some other platforms after making anti-Muslim comments. This blend of insider and outsider, of mainstream and conspiracy, is a feature of how Mr. Trump has reshaped the Republican Party in his image, and the core of his presidential origin story. Before Mr. Trump announced any firm plans to seek office, he was the national face of the birther conspiracy, which thrived in the Tea Party movement and had a significant amount of support from the Republican base, polls showed. Stacy Goodman, a former police officer from New York who retired to Arizona and attended Trump's stock, said her distrust of Mr. Obama's birth certificate had led her to Mr. Trump. "If you're Muslim, just tell us you're a Muslim," she said of Mr. Obama. "It's not that I didn't believe him. I'm just not qualified to answer that question. I've seen information on both sides that's compelling." End quote. Mona Fishman, a singer from the Las Vegas area who performed at the event, has written Trump-themed songs with titles like Fake News and Smells Like Soros, which accuses liberal megadonor George Soros of running a shadow government, a trope widely condemned as anti-Semitic. In the White House, Mr. Trump has relied on similar unfounded conspiracy theories and promoted people who have perpetuated them. He pardoned Joseph Arpaio, the former sheriff of Maricopa County, a hero of Arizona's right wing and a leader of the birther movement, who was convicted of criminal contempt related to his aggressive efforts to detain undocumented immigrants. On Mr. Trump's Twitter account, likely the most watched in the world, he has promoted white nationalists, anti-Muslim bigots, and believers in the QAnon conspiracy theory, which claims that top Democrats are worshiping the devil and engaging in child sex trafficking. Even mainstream conservative media figures have embraced QAnon as a way to dismiss Mr. Trump's political enemies. The Fox News host Jesse Waters, during a recent segment dedicated to the conspiracy, linked it to Mr. Trump's Washington enemies. Quote, "Isn't it also about the Trump fight with the deep state in terms of the illegal surveillance on the campaign, the inside hit jobs that he sustained?" he asked. The embrace of conspiracy theories has frustrated some establishment Republicans and moderate Republican voters who urge Mr. Trump to embrace a more traditional communication style. His base disagrees. "Please never stop tweeting," Ms. Fishman sings in one of her songs titled "Thank You, Mr. President." "I can hardly wait to see what I'll be reading." Events like Trump Stock are not limited to Arizona. Its organizer, Lori Bezek, recruited speakers from around the country through social media, tapping into a network of pro-Trump voices only a click away. Long-shot congressional candidates touting an America First agenda came from places like Iowa and Maryland. Leaders of fledgling political groups with names like Jexit, Jews Exit the Democratic Party, Latinos for Trump, and Deplorable Pride, a right-wing LGBT organization, told the overwhelmingly white audience they were not anti-Semitic, anti-immigrant, homophobic, or racist. In fact, the speakers insisted people who use those terms are more guilty of bigotry than the people they accused. To applause, the co-founder of Latinos for Trump, Marco Gutierrez, read the pledge he took when he became a naturalized citizen and renounced his Mexican homeland. Nightmare, a pro-Trump rapper who refused to give his legal name, invoked QAnon and called Mr. Obama a racist slur in his set. Brian Talbert, the founder of Deplorable Pride, was contacted by the White House after he was barred from the LGBT Pride Parade in Charlotte, North Carolina. At Trump Stock, Mr. Talbert, who has a history of expressing anti-Muslim beliefs on social media, gave voice to hatred of Mr. Obama and Hillary Clinton, the former Secretary of State and Mr. Trump's 2016 opponent. Quote, "I think we should be hanging at the end of a rope for treason," he said of Mrs. Clinton. Members of groups like these at once make up a critical portion of Arizona's conservative base and espouse derogatory rhetoric that must repeatedly be repudiated, creating political difficulties for the state's Republican lawmakers. After a photograph emerged last April of members of Patriot Movement AZ posing with Governor Doug Ducey, he said he had never heard of the group. "I absolutely denounce their behavior," he added. Trump Stock attendees say they are used to being denounced, another quality they feel they share with the president. It's part of why they are protective of him, to the point that they refuse to acknowledge the possibility of a Trump loss in 2020. Mark Villalta said he had been stockpiling firearms in case Mr. Trump's re-election is not successful. "Nothing less than a civil war would happen," Mr. Villalta said, his right hand reaching for a holstered handgun. "I don't believe in violence, but I'll do what I got to do." So, it's hard to even comment on some of this. I mean, this is, of course, an extreme group, and they said about 100 people showed up. But the level of intensity of these people and the clear thread that runs through them of violence. I mean, somebody wearing a handgun says, I don't believe in violence. There's somebody wearing a handgun and stockpiling firearms, says he doesn't believe in violence. I mean, the level of self-reflection is either non-existent in any of them, or they just don't even care at the contradictions. I don't know what it is, but anyway, I'll continue because I don't even know what to say about this. It is so extreme, and there are extreme groups out there all over the place. The difference here is this extreme group is directly connected to and responding to pretty much a fairly direct appeal from the president himself. And through that top-down thing, through the Republican Party generally, who sometimes pretends, like this, who was it here? Governor Doug Ducey, who posed with the Patriot Movement, members of the Patriot Movement, and then said he'd never heard of the group. I mean, come on, that's like playing both sides. I'm doing it, saying, hello, these are my friends, and then, oh, no, I don't know these people. I mean, it's ridiculous. It is really ridiculous. Anyway, I'll go on because I don't even know what to say. Okay, to continue, and here's where religion comes into this thing. This is an article entitled, One Surprisingly Simple Reason Evangelicals Love Trump. Why are white evangelicals so devoted to President Trump? It's a question that has preoccupied many academics and political observers, and a Christmas Day exchange between Pete Buttigieg and a Christian right blogger shed some light on one answer. Buttigieg, the mayor of South Bend, Indiana, and a contender for the Democratic presidential nomination, tweeted that Jesus Christ, quote, came into this world not as a citizen, but as a refugee, end quote. In response to that Christmas message, religious right blogger Matt Walsh tweeted that, quote, Joseph and Mary went to their ancestral home in Bethlehem for a census. In no sense did Jesus come into this world as a refugee, end quote. That pushback caught the attention of Eastern Illinois University political scientist Ryan P. Burge. The question of Jesus' immigration status is still a subject of debate among Christians, but Walsh's forceful response did underscore something for Burge that he wanted to dive deeper into: the fact that white evangelicals, like Matt Walsh, are incredibly conservative on immigration. In a post probing the issue on the site Religion in Public, Burge used data from a 2018 cooperative congressional election study, which asked about 60,000 participants a host of questions on a range of issues. On immigration, respondents were asked 5 different questions: whether they supported withholding federal funds from sanctuary states and cities, increasing border funding by $25 billion, detaining those who crossed the border without authorization multiple times, ending a visa lottery program and family-based immigration, both of which been the subject of President Trump's ire, and rolling back the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program, which has offered deportation protection and work permits to over 700,000 young unauthorized immigrants since 2012.